How are you, developers? I hope you're all fine. Welcome to today's class. In our previous session, we learned about HTML forms, where we explored the input element and its various types. Today, we're going to expand our knowledge further by exploring some other essential form elements and attributes that will enhance the way we collect and process our user input. If you have been following this course, you are aware of the repository that we forked, which contains the essential resources that we'll use in this course. To access today's notes, just log into a GitHub account, go to the repository that you forked, and if you are behind, click on the sync fork button, then click on the update branch, and your branch will be up to date. Then you can go to a Visual Studio Code and navigate to the cloned repository, then use the git pull command to pull the changes to your local machine. This ensures that you have the latest note for the course happy so that you can continue from there. Once you pull the changes, you'll notice that you have a new folder there called 08 forms. And inside that folder, there are two files. The index.html file, where we'll write our code there, and the readme file that contains the notes for the class. So I'll just use my Markdown previewer to open the readme file, and I'll open my index.html file here, like that. So once I have my index.html file opened here and my notes opened here, I'm good to go. So that much ado, we'll start today's class. As you have said earlier, that today we'll continue learning about forms. So I'll just put my boilerplate there in the index.html. Then I'll change the title forms, like that. So the first element that we'll look at is the select element. And as we said in the previous class, that all form elements should be surrounded in the form tag. This form element acts as a container for all the form inputs. So for you to put a form input, you have to surround it in the form element. So before you write the select tag, you have to first write the form element. Just to remind you, yesterday we learned about this input, where we talked about the input of various types, but I'll just use text for now. And we say that every input should have a label. So I'll just put a label there. I can say maybe name, like that. Then since the input is an inline, I have to put a line break so that the next input should go to the next line. So I can just copy this and replicate it below there. Then I change the label from name to email, and also the type from text to email. We also learned about the input type submit yesterday. This is just a recap of yesterday's class. And this input type submit is used to submit the form. That is some of the things that we learned yesterday. So in today's class, we'll continue from here. The first element we look at is the select element. And as you can see in the notes, that the select element defines a drop-down list. And the select element is used together with the option element. And the option element defines the options that can be selected. So let us look at how the select element is written. So I'll put a label, but I can say choose your favorite language. Then below the label, I'll put my select there. And beside inside the select, I missed some spelling, select. And say that inside the select, there's the options element. So I'll put here options. And the options element contains a available options for user to select. So here I'm talking about a language. Let me just duplicate these options. Since I'm talking about languages, I can say maybe HTML, here CSS, and here JS. And that is how you use the select element. Before we go to the browser, let us remind ourselves of how we linked the label to the input. So we talked about the four attributes in the previous class, and we said that the first attribute is just to create a relationship between the label and the input. So I'll just put the 4 there and say languages. Then in the select, I'll put an ID and also say language. We talked about this in yesterday's class. We said that if you put the value of the 4 and the value of the ID to be equal, this label will have a relationship to this input. So now let's go to the browser and see how the select and option attribute looks like. When you go to the browser, you can see here is our label. Choose your favorite language. Then you can see this is a drop down list where there is all the options that you put are there. So you'll notice that by default the first element that is selected is HTML, because HTML is the first option that we put. So the select as when you put an option as the first option, that is the option that will be displayed here. But you can see how to change this in a few minutes to come. But that is how the select element works. So let us go to the browser and see how we can change the behavior of which option appears here. Before we look at how to select an option, first we'll just recap on the value attribute and say that the value attribute specifies the value of that input. So we can just put the value attribute in all the available options, and this value attribute is what will be sent to the backend of your website. We already talked about the value attribute in the previous classes, and just like the radio buttons and the checkboxes, a user does not type a value, does not type anything when they are selecting these options. So that is why you have to provide the value element, so that when a user selects HTML, the website can know that the value is HTML. If you don't provide the value, a user can select HTML and your website might not know what value the user selected, and that is how you use the value. So now let us learn on how to make an option pre-selected. So by default, the selected element is usually the first option. This is the one that is selected by default, and you have already seen it in the browser. When you run this code, you can see that the element by default is HTML. But for example, if you want the selected option to be, let's say, JavaScript, you'll have to add an attribute here called the selected attribute. And the selected attribute does not have a value. It only has a name. Like we talked about attributes in the previous class, that an attribute can have a name. For example, this value attribute has the name value and the value HTML. But now this selected attribute does not have a value. It only has the name that is selected. We looked at similar attributes like required, which behave in the same way. So if you put selected attribute in the last option and you save, let us go to the browser and see that how this will behave. If you go to the browser, you can now see that by default the selected option is JavaScript. Even if you refresh the browser, you can see that the default option is JavaScript, and that is possible because you use the selected attribute. So a user can choose any option, but by default the one that is selected will be JavaScript, and that is how you use the selected attribute. The next element that we look at is the text area element, but I'll just add some comments here and say this is the select element. Then also here below the select, I can just add a comment and say this is the text area element. Exactly. So you can see in the notes that the text area element defines a multi-line input field. So in layman's, you can just say a text area is just an input of type text, but it allows more than one input line. Let's just create the text area and see what you're talking about. So to create a text area, you can just write text area like that, and it has a closing tag, and you can put some content here. But you'll say that every input must have a label. So just put a label and say additional information. Then below the label, you can put the text area and say text area, text area. Then here you can say add some additional comments. Also, the text area is a inline element, so you have to put some line breaks there for the submit to be in the next line. So let us go to the browser and see how this text area element looks like. So if you go to the browser, you can see this box here, and this is what we call the text area. So I've said that the text area is just an input of type text, but the difference between the text area and this input type text is that in text area you can put multi-line inputs. Like I can just hit on enter and write some more comments or some more text, but that is not the option in this input type text. This input type text, it's only in a single line. If I hit on enter, nothing happens. It does not go to the next line. It submits the form. When I hit on enter, it submits the form. It does not go to the next line. But in this text area, when I hit on enter, it goes to the next line and allows me to type some more content. And that is the difference between the text area and the input type of text. So text area can be useful when you want the user to add a lot of content in your form. You have seen in the browser that if you put some text inside the text area element, this is called content. If you add some content inside the text area element, the content will be displayed inside the text area or inside that box. This information will be written in that box. So when a user wants to type some different information, they have to delete this one first, then they start typing. And according to me, that's not a good user experience. So I'll advise you not to put any content inside the text area. But if you want to guide the user on how they can fill the text area, you can use the placeholder element, the placeholder attribute that we talked about, and there you can put the guidelines. So if this part is empty here inside the text area, if there's nothing inside the text area, you can see that in the browser the box will be an empty box, but there'll be this placeholder to guide the user on what to put. We already talked about the placeholder, so I'll just continue. So the text area has some extra attributes, and those attributes are the rows and the columns. The rows attribute specifies the visible number of lines in a text area, and the columns attribute specifies the visible width of a text area. So if you want the text area to be huge in terms of width, you'll add a columns property. Just add a rows and a columns property there. So rows determines the number of visible lines. So if I say rows 10, the text area will have 10 visible lines going down. And when I say it will have a columns of let's say 30, that will be the width of that text area. So let us save this text area and see how it will look like. Just go now to the browser. So when you go to the browser, notice that your text area is now big because you put some rows to 10. So this box can occupy 10 rows or 10 number of lines here. And also you can see this placeholder here. It guides the user on what to input, but also it does not affect the user when typing. So a user can type on top of it. The user does not have to delete that information first before typing a new information. So that is how you use the placeholder, and that is how you use the rows and columns. You can see I can just type there up to 10 lines. And also you can see the width is huge, and the width, I expanded the width using the columns attribute. Also, when you hover your mouse on the top bottom right, you can see there is an arrow which you can use to adjust the size of your text area like that. But even if you put this size and you refresh your browser, it will go to the default size that you specify using the calls and the rows attributes. And that is it with the text area. The next element is the button element. And a button element in HTML defines a clickable button. So by default, when you create a button element, it will be a clickable button will be displayed in the browser. But there's this catch here. When you put a button element inside the form, it acts as a submit button by default. So you can try putting this button inside our form and see how it will behave. First, I'll remove this input type submit. I'll just remove it there and replace it with this button. And I'll say that a button will act as a submit button by default. I can just put the value to be, let's say, sign up. So now I save and go to the browser. Let's go to the browser and see. When you go to the browser, you can see that our button is here. It is just a clickable button, and when you click on it, you can see that our page refreshes. And when a page refreshes, that means that the form was submitted. So this button here acts as the submit button. So you can either use the input type submit to submit your form, or you can just put a button inside the form element, and that button will act as the submit button. The next element is the fieldset and the legend element. We look at them together because they are used together. So the fieldset element is used to group related data or to group related elements within a form. And in most cases, it is used together with the legend element, and the legend element is used to provide a caption for the fieldset. In short, a caption for the related data in that form. And the fieldset element helps to organize and structure the form by visually grouping related form controls together. So let us write the code and see how the fieldset and the legend works. So we have said that the fieldset groups related data together. So let us say this first part of our form, the name and the email, let us say there. I'll group them inside a fieldset. So to group is just to nest. So I'll put the first two inputs inside the fieldset. Then I said that the fieldset is used together with the label. Now with the legend. So I'll say the legend is, let's say this is personal information. Like that. Then I'll group the rest of the select and the text area inside another fieldset. I'll just copy this code here, change that code and move it up like that. Then I'll save it. So I've put the select element and the text area element in another fieldset. Then I'll add a legend there. And so this one is additional information. So now let's go to the browser and see how the legend and the fieldset are. When you go to the browser, you can see that our form is now divided into two groups, and those groups were created using the fieldset elements. The first group is for personal information, and the other group is for additional information. And you can see that the legend acts as the title for that group. You can see this is the legend here. It acts as the title for the first group, and this additional information here, I missed the spelling, I'll correct it in the code. You can see this additional information here acts as the title for this other group. So the fieldset is used to group related inputs in a form, and the legend acts as the title for that group. And that is how you use the fieldset and the legend elements. The work of these elements is just to make your form to be in good structure, and also they are semantic tags, so they carry some meaning. It tells the screen readers that this first part of the form is related. So the legends and the fieldset are semantic tags. The next element is the datalist element. The data list element is similar to the select element, but there's a little difference. You see the difference here. So the data list element specifies a list of predefined options for an input element, and the users will see a drop-down list of the predefined options as they input data. So let us say this is the data list element, and the data list element is defined using the data list. The data list is defined. The data list element is used here. So you just have an input there. Then you say that the data list, it just provide a predefined option. So there will be an input. Then when you start writing the input, if the option you're writing is available, it will display. We'll see it in action. So we'll create an input, then we'll create a data list there. Then inside the data list, you'll put some options. I'll just put, say, 3 or 4 all options. And this input has a list attribute, and the list attribute should be equal to the ID attribute of the data list to create some relationship. So this list attribute here, for example, I'll call it, let us first put a label, and let us put a label here and say this list will be, let's say you'll be choosing your favorite browser. So you can say choose, let's say, what is your favorite browser? What's your favorite browser? What will be the label for this input? And also, and in the ID, we can just say this is just a list of browsers. I can just type here browser like that. So as we have said in the previous class, that the value attribute specifies the value of that option or of that input. So in this case, we're using option, so you can just select your browser. Maybe I'll say here Firefox. Then I can put here Google Chrome, here Microsoft Edge, maybe here Safari. And that is how the data list element is written. So let's go to the browser and see how this code will be. So here is our label. What is our favorite browser? Then you'll see this is the input that we created. But now this input is not similar to the other inputs, because if you move on this input, you can see there's this arrow, and when you click on that arrow, there is available options here that we put in the option list. And when I start, for example, if someone says CR, you want to write Chrome, you can see the Chrome is automatically there, and you can just click on it to just select it. So you have seen how the data list element works. There's an option here for drop down. You can just click on that option and select anyone that you want. Or also, if a user starts typing, say it says Safari, SAF, you can see this option is, there's a suggestion for the user to select Safari, like that. And that is how the data list element works. I forgot to add some line breaks here, and also I'll just put it in this field set. But that is the functionality of that data list element. Now the next topic is the form attributes. We say that the form acts as a container for all our inputs. So all the form inputs are nested inside the form element, and also the form element can have some attributes. The first attribute we look at is the action attribute. And just to remind you that attributes are put in the opening tag of an element. So I'll write here action. So the action attribute is used in the form element to specify the URL where the form data should be submitted. When a user clicks submit, the form is submitted somewhere, and that place where the form is submitted is specified using the action attribute of the form element. So your action attribute, you can put the URL of you can put the URL where the form should be submitted. In most cases, it's always a path to your, say, maybe PHP file. So write your index.php, and that is the work of your action attribute. When I click on submit, it will send this data to that file. You can see this is the absolute URL. But now, since I don't have the PHP file, it will prompt an error. But that is how you use the action attribute. The next attribute that the form can have is the method attribute. And the method attribute specifies the HTTP method to be used when submitting the form data. And the most common method are the get and the post methods. So you can just say yeah, method attribute like that method. Then here you can put either get or post. And we'll talk about the difference between the get and the post values of the method attribute. So the method attribute is set to get, the form data is appended to the URL as a query string. And the method is commonly used for forms that retrieve data without causing any side effects on the server. So when you use get, the information that you put in the form will be visible on the URL of that page. And since the data is visible in the URL, so get is not used to send sensitive information. Because if send sensitive information using get, someone can just see the information in the URL of your browser. And also, when you use get, the length of the URL is limited to 2048 characters. That means that get cannot be used to submit long forms or forms that have a lot of data, because the length of the URL is limited. And when you write, you have said that when you write your input, it displays in the URL. And since the URL is limited to certain number of characters, that means that also the input will be limited to that number of characters. That's why you say that get cannot be used to submit huge forms. The other thing with get is that get is useful when a user wants to bookmark the result. That is the only advantage that you can get when using get method. On the other hand, the method can also be post, and this is the most used method in the form. And post, one thing about post is that it is secure. So that get is not secure because it displays the data in the URL, and that maybe it's sensitive information that will not be useful to send sensitive information. But post does not display the data in the URL, but it appends the data inside the body of the HTTP request. So that is an advantage of using post. It is secure. Also, post has no size limitation, so it can be used to send large amounts of data. So you can see that post is preferred because you can send huge amount of data using post. But the only disadvantage of post is that your submissions cannot be bookmarked. That is the only disadvantage of using post. But you can see that post has more advantages than disadvantages compared to get. So the preferred method used to send your form data is the post method. And that is the end of today's class. See you in the next class where we'll learn about tables. So peace out.